In 1928, archaeologists working in Israel came across the remains of an ancient culture who they would later name the Natufians. Over the course of a millennium, starting at around 10,000 BC, the Natufians transitioned from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to a sedentary, partially agricultural way of life, with a town which was occupied by around 200 people, making this one of the earliest towns in human history. It is at around this time that this Mesolithic culture begins the uniquely human practice of burying their dead. In one of the discovered tombs, archaeologists uncovered the remains of what they believed was the deceased king, except for some reason, the king's body was propped up using stones to appear as though he was seated. If you watched my video about the theory of the bicameral mind, you would know that the psychologist Julius theorized that this king may have been deified by his people. Janes proposed that the Natufians were a bicameral civilization, which means that they heard the voices of gods through hallucinations, in a manner similar to schizophrenia. In the case of the Natufians, these hallucinations were first perceived as the king's voice, but when the king died, his voice may have still been heard in hallucinations. This may have led the Natufians to believe that the king's spirit was still alive, leading to the king being deified and his corpse entombed in an attempt to immortalize the dead king and worship his body as an effigy. Deification, also known as Apotheosis, is when a person is given divine status and considered to be a god. This may occur after the person is deceased, or it may occur during their lifetime. Sometimes, these mortals were considered to be godlike in their own right, or they were believed to be incarnations of previous gods. Attaining divine status is usually cemented with statues, temples, and artwork dedicated to the deified individual. Apotheosis occurred for different reasons throughout the history of mankind. These individuals are sometimes referred to as demigods, referring to the fact that they were once mortal, although in a more general sense, the term refers to anyone who is half god and half human. In the case of the Natufians, it may have been the very origin of the idea of gods. Hallucinations are perceived to originate from a living king, but when the king dies, these hallucinations continue. This thus produces the idea of gods as imaginary entities who live on after death. It is possible that many prominent deities were originally kings who were later given divine attributes, such as mastery over a particular aspect of nature. They may have also been included in mythological stories, which purportedly recount their lives. Perhaps this is why some kings claim to be the direct descendants of gods, which made their divine status more official. One example of this would be the emperors of Japan, who claim to be the descendants of the divine sun goddess Amaterasu. Whether Amaterasu was a real person, or based on a real person, however, is inconclusive, as evidence from this far back in history has not been found. In general, only special individuals such as kings, emperors, and generals were deified, although in some early civilizations, all of the deceased were considered godlike, indicating that their souls were in the afterlife, or that their presence could still be felt as hallucinations. This can be seen in Assyria, where texts refer to the dead as Ilani, or gods, and this was also a feature of the Aztecs. As the explorer Bernardo de Sahagún reported, the Aztecs called the place Teotihuacan, burial place of the kings. The ancients said, "He who has died became a god," or when someone said, "He who has become a god," meant to say, "He has died." The pharaohs of ancient Egypt were considered to be living gods, carrying a number of titles which proclaimed their divine status. As well as being a living god, the pharaohs were responsible for communicating with the gods and maintaining balance within his kingdom. They were considered to be incarnations of the god Horus while they were alive, and many pharaohs were also regarded as incarnations of other Egyptian deities, such as the vulture goddess Nekbet or the cobra goddess Wadjet. Upon death, the pharaoh transforms into the god Osiris. The practice of mummification was performed in order to prevent the corpses from decaying and preserve them for the afterlife. Food, riches, weapons, and anything else the pharaohs need in the afterlife were placed in their tombs. The Egyptians believed that the dead pharaohs continued to rule them in the afterlife. Occasionally, some non-pharaohs were also deified, a good example being Imhotep, who was believed by his worshippers to be the father of early medicine, although there isn't any historical evidence that he was ever a physician. Deification of living people was also a feature of the Incan Empire, where the emperor was believed to be the descendant of the sun god, and just like in Egypt, he was required to participate in a number of sanctified rituals. When he died, his concubines and attendants were strangled so that they can join him in the afterlife. His body, like in Egypt, was mummified and placed in a temple with all of the amenities he might need in the afterlife. In many instances, people are considered to be gods due to their remarkable achievements during life, standing as a good example for their worshippers to follow and aspire to. In ancient Greece, numerous hero cults arose which honored many of the Greek heroes, both mythological and historical. These heroes, although usually considered divine, were not considered to be on the same level as gods such as Zeus and Apollo, and they were generally not believed to inhabit Olympus with the other gods. Instead, their spirits were believed to still inhabit the earth, lending advice to their worshippers. Hero cults usually centered around the tombs or supposed tombs of the deceased heroes, and many of the heroes of the Trojan War were revered in hero cults. The Trojan War and the heroes who participated in it were considered by historians to be pure mythological fiction until archaeological excavations provided evidence that the war really did occur. Although the Iliad by Homer probably is not a perfect transcription of the events of the war. Nevertheless, there were cults to heroes such as Achilles, Hector, and Paris. Other heroes, both mythological, such as Heracles and Pandora, and real, such as King Leonidas and Philip II of Macedon, were deified. Alexander the Great was considered a living demigod, partially because of his unprecedented military success. The theme of deified individuals being featured in fictional myths is a common feature of history. The Sumerian king Gilgamesh was worshipped as a god, and nearly 1,000 years after his death was the Epic of Gilgamesh composed. Another Mesopotamian king, Naram-Sin, the grandson of Sargon of Akkad, declared himself to be a god after extending the Akkadian Empire to its maximum size. Extending divine status to successful conquerors was also a feature of deification in ancient Rome. During the Roman Republic, deification was not a common practice. Romulus, the mythical founder of the city of Rome, was deified as the god Quirinus, but Rome had a history of republicanism, and didn't like to consider any person to have divine attributes, because such a person may claim to be a king, and this could potentially undermine Rome's elected officials. This changed, however, once Julius Caesar became dictator of Rome. In addition to his impressive military achievements, Julius Caesar also happened to be head of the Roman state religion, and he declared himself Divus Julius, claiming that he was descended from Venus, the Roman goddess of love, and Mars, the Roman god of war. After his assassination, cults dedicated to Caesar began growing in popularity, and Caesar even had a comet named after him. This was the beginning of the Roman imperial cults, and many Roman emperors were deified, having huge temples erected to celebrate their apotheosis. In order for an emperor to be deified, it usually required the approval of the Roman Senate, and unpopular emperors, or emperors who failed to achieve anything noteworthy, were usually excluded from receiving divine honors. This had the effect of strengthening the emperor's symbolic power, and justifying his actions as divinely sanctioned. Ancient China had a history of deifying its emperors, who were considered sons of heaven. This title designated the emperor as the supreme ruler of the entire universe, in accordance with the mandate of heaven, which is the supposed mandate which gave divine authority to the emperors. Deification was also granted to several heroic figures, especially famous generals, such as Guan Yu, Liu Fei, and Fan Kuei. Unlike the Greek hero gods, many Chinese hero gods are still worshipped to this day. Guan Yu even has an airport named after him. In another example of deification of accomplished conquerors, in Mongolian shamanism, there was once a widespread reverence for Genghis Khan, and the center of this practice was a shrine dedicated to him located in Ordo City. Many people view Genghis Khan as a pillaging barbarian, but he held a heroic status in his native Mongolia. This shrine was destroyed during the rise of communism, as the Communist Party attempted to suppress the worship of Genghis Khan, but the temple was subsequently rebuilt. This list could go on to include a huge number of mortals, both historical and mythological, who were regarded as divine due to their achievements. For example, Hindu mythology contains numerous heroes who were thought to be the incarnations of deities or even other deified mortals. Declaring such people to be divine, in some sense, allowed them to live long after their deaths, in the form of shrines, temples, and statues, and these displays of reverence helped to immortalize the legacies of these apparently divine men and women.